So this series of sessions is designed as a very formal series of conversations. So we'll start out, and I've got a question for David to kind of launch the topic, but this is not a webinar. This is not designed to be a focused and designed pathway with a learning missive at the end. This is designed to be a roundtable where people can ask questions, they can share experiences, and we can all learn from each other. And so we believe that there's a lot of experience out there, and we want to provide more opportunities for people to bring that to the table and all of us to collectively get better. So I'm going to start, and I'm actually going to, after I just said there's no webinar, I am going to share one screen here just to orient people to this concept of value, right? So we talk about the value chain and service value. And I really, really love that the new version of ITBO goes and focuses so much on value, because I have a strong background in Lean and Six Sigma, and this very much feels to me at home. It feels like Lean for IT, which is something that I've tried and pushed for a long time. So it's made me very, very happy. What we're seeing with a lot of our clients, David, is that CIOs and service owners are starting to realize that this value piece is not something that shows up inside of IT very often. And that all of the work that they're doing and the money that's being spent from their budget and everything else that's going on inside of IT is an investment, but the value happens out in the organization, right? And so that conversation between IT and the business is so important. And that often service owners and other people who should be having that conversation don't have all of the knowledge and skills for how to do that. And so the creation of an IT business office that can supply them with analytics and reports and come to the table jointly with them, with the customers, empowers them a whole lot more. They get much better at discussing value with customers. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing as far as this progression and how some of your clients are approaching this?
Yeah, I can. And I can say I've seen all different sides and all different approaches to this. So I have to say, though, that going back to version 3, the concept of value being something that happens outside IT was already entrenched, and it has been growing since then. However, what I found is that most IT people are very uncomfortable with having that discussion. They're very comfortable with having discussion around cost. So can we allocate the cost of IT into certain buckets or towers or cost units or whatever categories they're using? And they feel that as long as they can quantify the cost of IT in more than just what appears in the chart of accounts, then they're doing fine. But what they don't do is link the cost of IT to something that's happening out there in the business, and that's where the value is getting created. And so what I'm seeing, a lot of people, and they're getting a lot of value, a lot of benefit, I should say, out of using tools to quantify cost, because now they can start looking at, well, where are we spending money? Which suppliers? What kind of infrastructure? What kind of applications? And so on. And it's much easier to track. It makes the job of operating IT a lot easier. But that in and of itself does not actually calculate value. It doesn't show what value is. And it's amazing to me the number of organizations that feel that they can have a discussion about value with a business unit without first having understood what the services are that they're delivering to that business unit.
Yes.
And let alone understanding what those services are, but then being able to quantify the cost of the service. Now, we can quantify the cost of service and we can combine the cost of service and applications, but what is the actual cost of the service? Can you assume that that combination of servers and applications or cloud services, for example, constitutes a service? Or is a service more granular than that? And that discussion doesn't often happen early enough. So to get back to the slide, what am I seeing in customers? I'm seeing a lot of my customers starting to make that jump into, from the back office of IT and moving into that link to where the value is created, understanding that just communicating cost information does not demonstrate value. And that if you want to demonstrate value, you have to actually sit in the actual business unit that is consuming those services. And you have to be able to compare cost with what's being achieved. And if you can't compare those two, then there is no value.
In Lean, they call it go to Gemba, right? Like walk the floor. You don't necessarily have to have a dispersed IT where people have permanent seats out with the organizations, but you better have somebody who has a very good relationship and is spending time amongst the people who are consuming services and understanding what their problems and challenges are.
Right. And to go back to Lean and even DevOps and Agile approaches, what a lot of organizations are doing is having product teams where you're formally aligning IT staff to and other staff into particular lines of business or particular services or particular products, and you're overcoming the problem that way. But let's face it, a lot of what we do in IT is not ever going to be aligned to a product team. How do you quantify the value of those? So you need to be able to operate and communicate financial information and value information in both very structured forms, as well as in for services that are broadly used without being linked to a specific or particular service, or a product line. So, but yeah, I think all of these things are very positive steps. But I think too many people are still stuck in the how do we quantify cost stage.
Yeah. And I think having an IT business office rather than an IT finance group is one of the things that we're seeing that starts to move people past that. And for us, what we're seeing is that business office may not even be a reorg. It might be kind of a virtual creation, but it's a partnership that starts to happen between finance, which may include the IT purchasing piece, or it might not. Enterprise architecture, service management, and if they have an organization or a group who is doing service portfolio management, which brings the service owners into it, as well as kind of the executive leadership who reports to the CIO, right? So having those brains all in a room on occasion escalates that shift from cost to value very quickly, right? When IT finance just becomes, what's my budget? What's my variance? Am I within my 2 or 5% variance this month, this quarter? Okay, all my GL accounts look good. You're never ever going to shift past that cost, right?
No, and there's a real problem with that approach, and that is that the way the industry is moving right now, and the introduction of new technologies, the digital transformation programs that are in place are far quicker than your budget cycle. And so you may find you're progressing down a certain road and you're doing very well within your budget, but something has happened that has just presented an opportunity. And if you take that opportunity, you're going to, number one, blow your budget. You're also going to achieve extremely high returns. But you go for it because your budget cycle doesn't allow you to do that. So one thing that happens as you create these business offices is that you speed up your budgeting and strategic analysis process.
Yes.
To close to real time, so that you can actually see opportunities as they come. You can model them. You can check their effect on the budgets and the strategy. And you can make decisions about whether to go for that or not. And if that decision requires you to spend extra money, that money becomes available, even if it wasn't budgeted at the beginning of the year. That's the kind of stuff that is going to start having to happen. Now, the theory for this has existed, for decades. It's part of standard financial management theory. But somehow it has become so embedded within these annual cycles that it's very difficult to move away from them. But creating a business office in this way enables you to move a little bit closer to that more dynamic budgeting, money spend, strategic alignment. And, to be very clear, this is about strategic alignment. We're not talking about, the fact that companies using way more storage than it should have because of irresponsible, data storage practices, or we've duplicated all data within the organization, and it's just highly inefficient. So we need to spend. But it's not that kind of decision. That decision happens at an operational level. Mm-hmm. We're really talking about the operational level is there, but we're also talking about the ability to link to strategic. Like, what is valuable to the business? Mm-hmm. What does the business need to help it grow, to help it enter new markets, to help it introduce new products and services? You've got to be able to answer those questions, because that's where value is created. Value is not created when you store data on a database. That's where you spend money.
Yes. And we talk about it as kind of the difference between being an effective air traffic controller, which is kind of what operations is, right? You're looking at all the moving parts and making sure nothing crashes and everybody lands where they need to safely. And being a navigator, that's like an active navigator, where you're a partner with the business and you're not just saying, oh, okay, yeah, I see you're telling me you need this, but you're saying, what's your destination? And I'm going to help you plan that route of how to get there, right? You're not telling me what the route is and I'm just going to remind you of it. I'm going to participate in telling you what some of the roadmaps are, or, hey, you have a goal, but you may not know there's a new digital technology that'll speed that up, or I can do automation that will make that cheaper or faster for you. And so you have to have that conversation about their goals before you can start to decide what changes you need to make internally.
That's exactly right. So when we talk about a business office, we're not just talking about an IT financial coordination office. We're really talking about is, what is the business? And if you take a number of functions that have been spoken about over the years, you take steering committees, especially the strategic steering committee. Mm-hmm. You take, let's say, the business relationship management processes and function. You take the service management office, pull those all together, and what you have is the business office. It's the what a friend of mine called Michael McGahey called the middle office. Okay. It's not in the basement. It's not actually the business, but it's in between, and it kind of makes sure that everything is coordinated and aligned. So yes, if that's the direction you want to head in, do we have the resources to make that happen? If not, how do we get those resources? How do we allocate them effectively? And how do we empower and equip the people who have to take those actions to be able to do them? Which is why in the service management office, a lot of people view the SMO, the service management office, as a kind of temporary project oversight for implementing ITSM processes. Well, that was never the intention. That could be one of the things that it did, but it was really a place to coordinate and facilitate the management of ITSM throughout the organization. Mm-hmm. And that's what a business office is. So incorporate some of the project management, especially the strategic portfolio management into there. Incorporate the financial management into there. Incorporate some of the process coordination activity into there, and process ownership activity into there. That becomes an office which can articulate really where is the value in this organization being achieved, and how do we support that? How do we get everybody behind that? That's what that office is all about, in my opinion, anyway.
No, and too often we see in clients who have all of those groups, instead of working in a coordinated fashion, there tends to be a bit of political infighting. There can be some territoriality. There can be the thought of like, well, you're always asking me for this information, rather than seeing how jointly they can produce information and value that leads to strategy. How do you help past that kind of political, social division that's been around for a while between those groups, and help them to see that if they work together, they both benefit, and everybody gets a little bit better.
Yeah, which is why in a lot of organizations, many of the business units are deciding to take that journey themselves. They now have access to the cloud services that they would have previously got from a back office IT department. Sometimes they can still source them through the IT department, but very often the product teams in these organizations are sourcing their own services, their own IT services in their own way. And they, in effect, those cross-functional teams are behaving as a business office for that particular product, which is great. It's fine. But then you have to make the assumption that all of the products in that organization, all the lines of products are coordinated and headed in the same direction, which, who does that?
Doesn't always happen.
No. So, you know, that, and that's, again, I think when you look at this at too low a level, too detailed a level, it's very easy to think that because you've defined all the components, you've quantified them, you've put a cost on them, and you're managing them, that you are therefore an effective part of the organization. And that's not always true. Mm-hmm. You can be doing everything right, but still be doing the wrong things. And I think, you know, there've been so many arguments over the past few years about, you know, whether DevOps is better than ITIL, which is better than SAFE, or, you know, whatever happens to be coming out. And it's a fruitless argument, because all you're doing is you're arguing about granular components of how you do stuff. And you're still not asking the question, who defines what needs to be done? And how do we coordinate everybody using all of these approaches to make sure that they're all headed in the same direction? And I think a business office is a really good way to do that. Mm-hmm. It does not depend on an organization going after ITIL or DevOps or any other methodology, Lean or Six Sigma. In fact, what it depends on is all of those, if they're in use in the organization, being used effectively. And a business office, so it's more than just finance, right? It's a whole. Yep. It involves governance. It involves coordination. It involves oversight. And I think. So, you know, your first question was, what do I see happening in customer sites? I see a lot of organizations moving in that direction. But the first step is always to establish the business office as a financial reporting facility. Yeah. And I'm like, but that's only going to get you so far. You need to build these other pieces in, and that has to come from the very most senior level in the organization.
I've been wondering lately, as I talk to people, if the fact that we put business in it makes people, especially technology people, immediately think of money. So then they're thinking of finances, and whether maybe we're giving it a bad name. Maybe we should start calling it like the IT strategy and analytics office, or, you know, the storyboarding office, or, you know, something completely different. The kind of like, yes, the money is important in this. Absolutely, right? But there's a whole lot of other coordination and discussions around value that have to happen to justify that money. And right. If you don't have that value conversation, you're always going to be on the defensive rather than proactively navigating the business.
And part of that, and I think, yes, maybe we need to think about naming as if we're still in the days when IT is separate from a business office. So there is an IT office and a business office. No, or the business office is specifically unique to IT. No, actually, these days there are so many more components that need to be included and considered as you figure out what goes on. But having said that, financial information is the language of business, and yeah, so absolutely. Therefore, you know, if you're going to establish a business office, whatever you want to call it, it also needs to include the financial information. But now I'm going to go a little bit in a circle here, because financial information only tells you so much.
Derek says the Value Realization Office, the VRO. I kind of like that. Derek, you can go off of mute. You were making a chuckle before. Did you have a comment or a funny story about this? You're still muted. Yeah. There you go.
Sorry. I have to be weaned off Teams. So no, I love listening to Dave. So, but I won't. We'll chirp up. And I think Dave's very right in that there has to be a financial element of the decision making that we do here. And yes, the service management office gets lost or seen as the holders of the process books and other things. I mean, I work in an organization now that we have the DOSO, the Delivery Operations Standards Office. Okay, it's the closest I've ever been in a true service management office with the right governance and the right operation and delivery realization kind of thing. But what it doesn't have is any feedback into the strategy, because the most important strategic decisions are which services, I'll use that term loosely, should we stop investing in and switch off because they are past their shelf life, they have no added value, we have no distinctive means of adding value or whatever the case is, and where should we invest our resources where value is not being realized, or where we have needs that are underserved. And I'm talking like a little version 3 strategy book here, but that stuff is valid. Dave, I mean, I remember a presentation you gave where we talked about you can't measure return on investment in IT, in internal IT, okay? And I had a stand-up argument at a conference that I chaired where the head of a large bank's electronic banking division told me that I was talking through my head, but we had a long discussion and we solved it in public. And she said, you're right, we cannot measure the return on investment in IT for an internal IT shop, because IT doesn't buy assets for its own consumption. It buys it on behalf of a business value proposition. And simple things, service value potential, that concept, people just they glaze over. They don't understand that we need to use service accounting techniques. So even, our biggest enemies are our standard bookkeeping practices and accounting practices. The bill of accounts, the chart of accounts leads to bad decision making in IT if you're putting buckets of categories in, and you have to think differently. So the service valuation office or the alignment office, the value alignment office is there because it needs to be a different thing. And the problem is, and I'm sorry I'm being negative, because you're right, Dave, the direction is moving in lots of customers. So outcome-based services is the flavor of the month, but it's still lip service, because no one has gone back down and said the outcome for the business or for the client is a improved utilization of return on their assets, or a reduction in risk, or an ability to have improved decision making at a managerial level, or something that you can actually bring down into a business value. We go higher availability, lower maintenance costs. We're still stuck in the technology mindset. Unfortunately, it's a journey. We have to get past.
So Derek, I was looking at a client's scorecard the other day, and I'm not going to name names, but I finished looking at it, and luckily it's a client we've had for a long time, so I can be like super frank, which is something that we're known for. And I went, look, like this scorecard looks like something put together by a survivors group from like somebody who's been beaten in childhood. Like every metric on there was, please don't hit me, please don't hate me, right? I mean, it was, don't miss a target, keep your uptime. And there was absolutely nothing on that scorecard that had to do with what you were actually contributing value back, or how you were innovating, or where you were growing. And I think IT for so long just gets down into how can I not fail? How can I not get yelled at, rather than how can I make things better? And shifting that conversation. And I think part of it has to come from the top down, right? This is a very hard thing to do grassroots up. That the C-level and vice president, director kinds of people have to have that kind of vision to encourage it in their people. If they're still measuring people on, is your uptime correct? Nobody's going to break out of that.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Completely. I think it becomes it's not my fault scorecard. Okay, I'm green in all areas, and I'm doing what I'm not doing what I should be doing, but I'm doing what you told me to do. And I mean that's a great conversation. So there's another I will shut up now. You see, that's why I don't get in the chat. But
no, don't shut up, because I want to take this not from like a griping session of like how frustrating
it's a round table.
Well,
but what can we put out there? What are tools? What are things that we can give people? What are conversations we should all be having with clients or having them have with each other that can help them break through this? Because when people do break through, it's life-changing, right? Like the organization just operates completely differently. And we see people who they're talking about right-sizing their budget, and they're having conversations about my baseline keep the lights on spend, and then on top of that, the investment spend of how I'm moving the organization forward, or how they're growing and how we're responding to that. And when you take that business type approach to the business, they get it, right? Like they want to have conversations like this. I think IT just hasn't figured out how to have them yet.
We're our own worst enemy, and I think we often don't. We think we have to resort to business speak, So, but you've got to find ways to get common ground. So one of the common ground things to avoid the debate between it should be lean, or it should be safe, or it should be agile, or it should be idle, or it should be covered. It can go around it. One is a simple fact. If you think about the half-life of plutonium, which is 157 years, think about the half-life of a traditional IT project that has a lifespan of 12 months. Okay, given that only 10% ever come in on time, on budget, and was in scope. Okay, 6 months into a 12-month project, technology and business has changed so much that you are not going to get close to half of the value that you started out aiming for, that you're going to run late on anyway. So that's a conversation you can have.
Really insightful. That is a great point.
So the half-life of a long-term traditional waterfall IT project is, I don't know, its value is reduced by 20 or 40 or 50% the longer it does. Doing agile in not agile, so doing water agile full, which is the hybrid model that we use right now, which is we have agile teams made up of like-minded individuals doing pieces of the walk and delivering waterfall chunks every 3 weeks instead of every 3 months or every 3 years, is also a failure, because you once you have momentum, you can't pivot. Okay, so the discussion around being who drives the time to pivot. If the business is going down a direction where, I don't know, I'm going to use a hypothetical example, Walmart is squeezing more life out of their supply chain again in order to cut costs. And on the other hand, they're buying back their own shares to prop up their share price. As a business model, IT, you're never going to have a conversation with them to say, why are you doing this business model, the race to the bottom thing? Can we not come to the table with ways to innovatively build market share, or define our range and reach of products, or we're afraid to have those conversations because we don't think like it. We think the business will only listen to us when we tell them the lights are green. And I don't know, I'm not smart enough to know how to do that, but if we can find different hooks to have different conversations and lead with value, rather than leading with solutions, then I think we've got half a chance to get there.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the kind of dynamic we're talking about here. It's what I'm just labeling currently the business-minded IT leader. Is a person who's able to have that kind of discussion because they're astute in understanding their business. Interesting, as Derek's talking, is like how many IT leaders at every level have actually spent significant time on the shop floor of whatever their business is. You talked about the Gemba walk. And actually I've done some informal surveys. Every organization that I go into is like, when last did you see an IT person? Ask the IT people, how many days a year do you spend on the whatever floor it is that they work in? And it is really sad. The two sides do not regularly see each other, and if they do see each other, there's no planned agenda. It's always, well, hey, where's that thing I ordered 3 months ago that you guys can't ever get your act together to produce, or whatever the case may be. and there's never a healthy discussion, because then the answer to that is, well, if you would spend more, we would be able to fix these processes. Oh, but isn't that your job? and that's just a spiral downwards. And, the only value comes, well, if you don't pay me, I'm going to turn your stuff off. That's not a good value proposition, right? So, to use Derek's Walmart example, that's exactly the kind of discussion you need to be moving to have. And it takes more than financial information. It takes an understanding of the business that you're in, and not just business in general. If you work in Walmart, since you raised the name, Derek, if you work in Walmart in the IT department, you'd better understand Walmart. Not just finance, not just marketing, but how does finance and marketing work within Walmart? And how does that apply to me as an IT person? And if there is going to be a significant investment in digital marketing in the organization that is going to change the behavior of our consumers, what impact does that have on the key services that I deliver today?
Right.
But we don't have that connection in place to be able to have that discussion. So, to me, one of the first things that you should do is just go out, make appointments with as many business leaders as you can. Don't ask me which ones. Look at anybody who's at the same level or higher than you. Mm-hmm. Go out and meet with them. Sit down. Ask them what they do. Ask them how they measure value. That's another point, and I was circling back before I forget. Value is not always financial.
Correct.
And that makes value a highly subjective term. And this is, again, something we fail at. We think we have to come up with an objective measure of value, that it's black and white. It's either this or it's that. And if it's this, then it's not valuable. If it's that, then it's valuable. And the only black and white and appropriate metrics that we can use are financial. Nonsense. That's absolutely not the case. There are so many ways in which business units calculate value that have nothing to do with finance or little to do with finance. It may come back to finance on the back end, but, and I always have to ask people when they talk about value is, when you go to a restaurant with your family, how do you define value? Guaranteed they're going to talk about things like flavor. They're going to talk about speed of service. They're going to talk about quality of the food. And then they will compare that with saying, and the atmosphere, music, and then they're going to come back and they're going to compare that to the price tag on the menu. And it's that comparison which says, was that good value or wasn't it? Now, all of this, so only one of those things is objective, and that's the price on the menu. The rest of them are all subjective. What mood am I in? Well, who did I go out to dinner with? Derek will tell you, dinner's never good value when he and I go out together, but that's actually always good value. But it's always good value, right? If you're in a better mood, you will perceive that you've received better value for your money. So there's a lot of subjective aspects to this. And this is why I think when we talk about financial management and measuring, a lot of the tools that we use in measuring service quality and value have to use metrics that are generated by the users or customers of those services and not by the providers. Well, we can tell them availability, we can tell them cost, but that's not value. The value comes as, well, yes, I used that service when it was available, and these are the things I did with it. And that's what's important to me. I learned this lesson a very long time ago, back in my youth, back in South Africa, where Derek and I worked together. But I worked in a shipping company, and my desk was 3 desks down from the logistics manager. Now, the logistics manager had one job. His job was to know where every single shipping container was and whether it was full or empty, so that he could position it to the right place so that it could be loaded for the next ship. You got them in the wrong place, you couldn't find them, delayed the ship, the shipment, customers were unhappy, and so on. My job was to manage the IT systems. And every single day, Ray would come across to me and would show me all of the lists of containers that he could not find because the system update had not been done properly, and where were his containers. And I learned very quickly to understand the relationship between the data that was in this database and the physical location of those containers, and what it meant if Ray could not locate one of those containers to get to a customer so that they could pack it so that it could be shipped on time. It helped that I worked on the same, on the same floor as these guys. Because if I hadn't worked on that floor, all I would have seen was a customer who couldn't stop complaining, you know,
Yep.
and provided with a couple of printouts and hoped that that sorted the problem out, which it would have in some cases and wouldn't have in other cases. And I would have, the business would have suffered. But I would have been doing my job fine, because I could measure all the backups that I was doing. I could measure, you know, all of the runtimes, all of the operational activities that had been performed. The data was transmitted from one office to the other. Back in those days, using a 64 baud modem, 64K, you know, modem.
Yep.
You know, I could do that, and yet the company was losing money because it couldn't find its containers, because the information that I was providing them was not captured correctly or wasn't processed correctly, or whatever the case may be. I learned that lesson very early on. Mm-hmm. You have to learn to see value in terms of what it is that the person who's using the service is trying to achieve, and that's it.
So I want to make sure we kind of loop back around. I want to summarize a couple of points and then see if we can find, like, I like to come out of roundtables like this kind of with some action items, things that we can all take away that we want to do better, right? Or ways that we can start to change the conversation as we go back out into the world. So one of the things we talked about was that it's really critical for the highest levels of executive IT, the C levels and those vice presidents, to be actively talking with the business and engaging with them and really understanding what their goals are, what their pain points are, and not just waiting for the business to come to them either with a new request or with a complaint, but going out and being proactive to understand the business issues. So that's like, if you're a C-level executive or a vice president in charge of applications or infrastructure or whatever, those are the conversations you should be having. We also talked about inside of IT, potentially creating a IT strategy alignment value realization office. That's going to be evolving, but there's something coming out of this. But what we used to call a business office, but understanding that it needs a financial mindset that's not just classic chart of accounts, budget variance analysis, but really doing service modeling and being able to do active what if modeling. So producing a static service cost model and publishing it and running it once a month isn't going to get you there. That's understanding your costs. Using it to make strategy decisions and doing active what if modeling and doing all kinds of variances and changes and experimenting with it to try and figure better ways or get insights from it is kind of what takes you to that next level. And then bringing those finance analysts, kind of like IT FP&A, right? So you're not an accountant, you're more of an FP&A approach, together with, we talked about the service management office, the project portfolio management process, enterprise architecture. Who else are we thinking should be involved in these conversations to make it really effective? Who do we want to bring together inside? So,
I mean, you could pretty much bring almost anybody in. I'm thinking, but anybody from a strategic level, right? I mean,
okay.
We know we'd love to see some components from the operations side, from the operational ITSM side, like service desk and incident and problem and so on. But realistically, those are consumers of this information rather than participants in the decisions that get made here. The same with capacity management. Capacity management depends heavily on strategic forecasting and workload forecasting and that kind of thing, which, to be honest, is not done nearly enough today. It used to be a major issue because you had to manage capacity, otherwise you ran out and you couldn't replace it. It just wasn't.
It's just endless in the cloud, right?
No, it's endless in the cloud. The problem is that has not stopped costs from spiraling out of control. And I mentioned storage earlier because I'm just dealing with one of those particular situations right now where storage costs have gone through the roof. Nobody knows why. When you look at how people in the organization are using storage, it becomes very clear why, because there is no management of data. The workload involved, the workload management that should be done to identify which data is used for which business purpose by which users and customers does not exist. And so it's just, well, whenever we need storage, we'll just upgrade it. It's cheaper than planning. It turns out it isn't actually cheaper than planning, and it's coming back to this certain point at which that return on investment is not achieved. So so I would say, capacity management, I don't know if that's a consumer of this. I would imagine a strong participant in this, and I would love to bring back some more traditional capacity planning back into organizations. I would just love to see a lot more of that, because there is no substitute for the kind of discipline and rigor that a good capacity analysis does. It really shows how pieces link together and what where the value is being generated. So it's very helpful. We should not throw that away at all. Yeah.
Business relationship management. We talked about, of course, that makes very much sense to have them involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who else, Derek? Who else would you have kind of in this strategy group?
The strategy group, I think this is a left field idea, and it's quite radical, but I think you need someone whose job it is to exercise the Al Pacino strategy. Okay. And I don't know if you guys saw Al Pacino in the movie Casino. He's quite a scary person, but behind his desk, and there's this glass window that looks out over the casino gambling floor, there's a simple sign with 2 words on it. It has the word no in about 100-point font in big black letters, and the word yes in about 6-point font underneath. Okay. That sounds weird, and again, sometimes humor breaks the thing, but IT has become such a whipping bag for so many things that we actually measure and incent things that are counter-strategic, completely counter-strategic. We create mission statements that says we will provide value, and we will deliver great service, and we will bend over backwards to do everything. And the answer should, most of the time, when the business comes along with some ridiculous thing, and say, no, because that's not strategic. When the business asks for things that are not strategic and IT bends to that will, then no one's getting any favors or any benefit out of that situation. So you need a maverick who goes up and says, that fancy business requirement that you want us to deliver in some ridiculous time frame with no budget and no resources is counter-strategic. The answer is no. And we don't do that very well. So even in the strategic think tank, I think very often we need to have someone who plays the Al Pacino strategy, which is big no, little yes. Okay, right. And you better pass some hurdles, okay, to do that. So just a thought. And I know it's radical.
It would be,
but
no,
I don't think it's radical at all. I'm 100%
absolutely
behind that.
Be good if that person came out of the business.
Absolutely.
It would
Absolutely.
be very nice if you could find that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
and I'm wondering if some of that. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
We were all going to say something.
I think the delays. Yeah, all good for something. Yeah. The delay catches me a little bit from Johannesburg, but sometimes I think it's someone whose maverick role is expected and welcomed from the whole group as a way to do that. So sometimes it could be an IT person, but obviously it can't be someone who's head in the server, so right down to the motherboard. Okay. So it has to be someone who's articulate in that thing, but who's contrarian, for the benefit of the group. And I like that's what people get this idea of the Al Pacino strategy. They laugh. I recognize that in the movie. Yeah, big no, little yes. I didn't think about it that way. But there's a real pattern of us making strategic decisions, throwing cascading KPIs and objectives and measurements all the way down. And then as fast as we do that, we counteract them and defeat those things by being nice and all things to all men and answering every requirement that comes from the business as if it's some sort of holy grail we have to follow. And the answer should be no, it's not strategic. And when the business does push those things down, we have to have a mechanism to do that and push that back. Yeah. Because otherwise we just go back into the spiral, that downward spiral you talked about there. So yeah. That's, I think, an important role to have.
I'm currently working in a hospital group, and what's very interesting about this particular group is that the product owners for all hospital systems are nurses. right? So these are the people who are in
Very
charge
cool.
of taking requests from the hospitals and saying, here's our strategy for software and technology as we're going to use them in the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And they understand, better than most exactly what is being asked, why it's being asked, and whether it's strategic or not. So we have the big no little yes coming in, but by the same token, when they make a decision to go ahead and do something, and there's resistance from individuals in the user community, they know how to do. Okay, so I've been in your shoes. This is going to make your job easier, and this is how. Okay, right, which an IT person can't do because they've never been there before, and that's a very interesting. So it works both ways. It's benefits all around.
I wonder if we've really done a disservice. As we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking, so, about 10, 15 years ago, we started telling CIOs and people IT should behave more like a business, right? And that came out of you're a customer service organization. So now they're thinking customer service businesses. And most people, their interaction with business is something like retail, right? And so they think of the customer is never wrong. And that's completely a horrible construct to be in. But when I say act like more like a business, they're like, oh, okay, the customer's always right. I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do, however they tell me to do it, and make them happy. My biggest goal is make the customer happy. Whereas if we had told them, you need to act more like an investment manager, like a financial, like I have stocks and bonds and things that I'm managing, right? Like here's a bucket of money the business is giving you, and you need to act like an investment manager, act more like an investment manager, help me get a value return on this. Well, investment managers tell people no all the time. They say, hey, I want to buy 13 stocks of something. Yeah, that's not a good idea, right? Like, don't do that. I'm really wondering if we did a horrible disservice of telling people act like a business, because their idea of how a business behaves is broken.
Yeah, no, we absolutely did. And I'm on record as fighting that from the early 90s. Mm-hmm. The reason is this: it's fine if they're external customers, right? If they're external customers, they're paying you money that covers the cost of you doing whatever it is they're asking you to do. So you go and do it. You better do it right, because they're paying you the money to do that. Yeah. But when they're internal customers, their business objectives are the same as your business objectives.
Right. Yeah.
And I use a stupid example, but it works well. If I'm a CIO, or I used to work for HP. If I'm HP and a customer came to me and said, we need a hyper secure data center. We want you to build it for us. It needs to be on the moon. HP is going to say, sure, we can do that. Here's how much it's going to cost you. And they will charge them the earth to make that happen. And they'll make a profit out of it, provided it's legal and provided it's possible, right? Which is arguable, but sure, they'll do that. Now, change the scenario. Marketing director comes to the CIO and says, I want you to build a data center on the moon. What's the CIO going to do? It's like, yeah, sure, you're the customer. You're always right. It's like, you do that, we're both going down because this company will go bankrupt.
Right. That's right.
You really have to. So you're absolutely right. This whole thing, the customer is always right. Yes, they're customers at an operational level, but from a strategic level, these are our colleagues. So we need to change that saying from being, manage IT as a business to manage IT as part of your business. Where I'm a colleague with the other people in that business, and we work together to achieve the same objectives. And if one of us is demanding that the other one spend money, it's both our money, right? It's hitting the profitability of our company. It's not hitting my department or your department. It's hitting our company. So this is the classic thing of the business units all come up with their strategies and they're fine and they all demonstrate how their strategy is going to make money. And then they put it onto the IT department. The IT department only has 15 people working there, and they have to do the work of about 300 people. And they say, well, how do I prioritize this? And every business unit turns to them and says, well, mine's the greatest priority. Well, how do you work that one out, right? You need that oversight which says, no, okay, there are 15 strategies. out of those 15 strategies, there are 30 initiatives. These are the top 5. And that's what I want you guys to be working on. And that's a senior executive. That is not some decision that gets made by the poor IT project manager who has to figure out what these conflicting priorities are. I know I'm exaggerating the situation, but.
Well, not always.
Yeah. And I think that is part of what a business office, if that's, whatever we're calling this thing, that is the role that it should play. Of course, the next thing is, okay, how long is it going to take us to put one of these things in place? This is not something that you decide today and do tomorrow. It changes the culture of the organization. It changes the processes, the reporting, the budgeting cycles, the whole thing. So this is a long-term kind of thing. But at the same time, there's probably 1 or 2 really quick steps that we need to put in place immediately to start down the journey. 1 is getting out on the business floor, understand what they need. And 2 is learning the language of value that they speak and starting to communicate in that value, whatever that is. And that's not difficult to do. It's very simple service mapping, value stream mapping, if you like. These techniques exist. This is nothing new. Right. We can do it. But what surprises me very often is people say, well, no, but that's been in place for ages and it hasn't worked in the past. Did you actually ever use it in the past? No, it existed in the past. Did you actually go and map out your services? No, we've never done that. Well, okay, try that. Because that's one of the fundamental things that you need to do in any service provider organization. If you don't have a map which tells you which services you provide and how you deliver them, you're not going anywhere.
Well, David, those were amazing words of wisdom to close this out on. I think that gives people real actionable things to start with and some longer strategy things to think about. And I think all of us need to work on changing that conversation and the language and how we're talking to people about this. This roundtable series will continue about once a month. So I hope that you guys will join us back for the next one. We'll be putting it on the books shortly. We're going to be working with Mark Bradley, who I know that you know, David. And so he's going to be kind of the featured on the spot person like David was today. But, it's a roundtable and we want lots of perspectives and lots of conversations. So we look forward to this conversation continuing and helping people to grow through this journey of understanding, defining, measuring, and delivering value.
Brilliant. And I'll put a plug in for Mark as well. Mark has been through this journey for many, many years. He has worked with many of the tools that are used in this space, and he has seen, pretty much every good thing and every bad thing that's happened in this space. And I think just being able to pick his brain about how this works is going to be phenomenal. I will make sure I buy my ticket to attend.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Derek. And for those of you who are watching the recording, if you've got questions, this will be up on the blog. Please join the conversation out there, or feel free to reach out to us directly and we'll connect you to the appropriate person. Thanks very much, all.